Hello everyone, I'm here to show you how to create the blocker and the ball. Here I was messing with the code inside the blocker. This controls the area which it moves on the y-axis, and this controls the speed of the ball itself, of the blockers themselves. This controls the speed, the location, and adding it with this factor multiplied by the tick and setting the actor location. Here's the blocker begin overlap. I'll go over that a little bit more in depth in a moment, but I'm going back to the ball itself. What I'm doing, you're going to need multiple. You're going to need two classes. Here's a U-static mesh component. Here's here are three functions and three U properties. Here's the ball power up active. Here's the begin overlap and the end overlap. There you go. Here's a root component. Here's the ball sphere. Create this here. You're creating default subobject and setting that as the root component. Creating the sphere sphere component. Adding a begin overlap and end overlap. Setting that sphere to setting it up to the ball mesh itself, and setting the simulate physics to true so that then it falls to the floor, and you can just roll it around. Here you're checking. Here is a function that you're calling with a timer that's inside the overlap itself, inside the on-component begin overlap itself. And what it's doing is checking to see if the player is overlapped. Player is overlapped with the ball. That's what this other actor parameter is for. Allows you to properly check to see if the character is overlapped. Without this parameter, you wouldn't be able to use that variable to any effect. Whenever you're using an overlap, you use the other actor variable parameter here. Here are all the parameters for the begin overlap and end overlap as well. You see here. Here's an integer checking to see if the character is overlapped with the ball itself, and using that as a control variable, so that then you're checking the state at which the character is in, whether he's overlapped with the ball or not. Getting the world to setting, and what I'm doing, I'm checking to see the player is overlapped, and if the power up is collected and it is equal to true, which is in here and inside the character. And I'll show you how that chains together here. I'll go inside the character. And the power up, what you do, you pick up the power up. You're setting it to true. I'm gonna go over here to the power up. You're not setting it to true. You're calling the function inside the character. Setting power up is collected equal to true, and you're giving it a timer. And when that timer runs out, it sets it to false. So returning to the ball itself, as long as the power up is collected is equal to true and the player has overlapped, this will be set to true. I'm doing that to validate the state of the variable itself, so that then I know that the variable is true. So that then I know which state the variable's in. and then I'm calling this function. That'll set this variable equal to 1 over and over again, as long as I have the power up, and I'll keep calling it, verifying if the ball has overlapped with the character once the power up has been picked up. It'll keep looping. It's a looping timer. It'll keep verifying on constant. Here, this line of code is unnecessary, I believe. I'm not calling anything with it. Here, I'm checking to see if player is not overlapped, if power up with collected is equal to false, and if the ball is overlapped character is equal to 1. So then it could be reset to 0. You gotta think of in terms of how during runtime, how can you get these checks to validate, to not validate, but to be correct. These checks to be unequivocally correct. And then what you do, you set that to 0. So now it's 0 now. Once you exit the overlap, and you also have the power up that is collected is equal to false, and then and if power up is collected is equal to true, the ball has overlap. This will not fire also. If this will not fire if the power up is not collected or the timer on that boolean has ran out. If the power up has worn off, this will never be called, regardless of how this timer is looping. This will continue being blocked. This timer will continue being blocked from being able to execute this line of code here. But if you have the power up sets and you overlap with the ball itself, it'll set equal to 1. And then once you exit the overlap and the power up is false and it is equal to 1, then this is set to false. This is set to 0. And vice versa, as you see here, if the power up is collected, and the reason why I'm not checking if it is equal to 0 because the variable is already set to 0. It's not necessary to check for that, because it's usually between these two functions here. These two functions are fighting each other. I'll just put it like in that sense. They're always fighting back and forth. It's like a tug of war between these two functions. And then it's kind of a tug. Here I'm inside the blocker class now. Here's a variable. There's a control boolean. Here's a blocker. Here's a trigger volume. And here's the on-component begin overlap event function. Here is the default subobject. Both default subobjects, setting up the attachment to the blocker mesh, and then calling this inside the constructor so at the end the overlap can begin. You always want to do this. If you're ever using overlaps, call this function. If you need to call it, you need to link it, and you need to cast to this function. Always. Here, what I'm doing, I'm getting the float factor. And depending on your version of Unreal Engine, I forgot to mention that you may have to put this inside the begin play inside the begin play function instead of leaving it in the constructor, depending on your version of Unreal Engine. Here's a local variable called factor. Here is a new location, which is get actor location, which is the actor's current location. I'm setting the new location. If it's greater than, if this is greater than, well, if the new location on the y-axis, this is the y. You can have the x, the y, the z. Here's the y-axis. I'm using the y-axis because it's moving laterally. It's moving left and right. And that's all I want. I don't want to move vertically up and down, just left and right. And here, I'm checking to see if it's greater than 2,300. What this does, it basically changes the distance at which the blockers end. That will go all the way along until it is greater than, until the actor location axis is greater than or greater than 2,300 f, or if it's less than negative 2,300 f on the y-axis in particular. And I'll set this boolean to true or to false. And here I create a switch case, which found out recently that you could use a boolean with a switch case, and that just simplifies this entire dilemma because you wouldn't have to use something, any ternary operators, and so you could just use a switch case and switch back and forth based on whether or not this boolean is true or false. And here, use true, setting it to 1,000. If it's equal to false, set it to negative 1,000. And what I'm doing, I'm adding to this, to the actor's current location with the factor multiplied to delta time, which is the speed. This is the speed at which the box travels, the blocker travels. And I'm setting the actor location. The reason why I'm multiplying it by delta time is so that then the speed moves on tick. If you don't multiply this by delta time, you're not gonna, it's gonna be instantaneous. The speed is gonna be instantaneous. It will not be on tick. It will not move every frame. Which is reasonable reason to use tick in this case, because a lot of people would say, well, using tick is bad for performance, etc., etc. But I think in certain cases it's kind of a necessity. In this case, it would be a necessity and much simpler just to use tick. Or this would be a necessity to use tick. So that then the movement isn't instantaneous, and you're not gonna, and you want to be able to show movement. But using tick as little as possible is also a good idea. It's very good idea not to use tick. If there is any other way to be able to make the actor move without using tick, use that method. Do not use tick. Just in this case, because there's only one actor in the world that is moving throughout the engine and not messing up the frame rate. You just one actor, that's it, and no big deal. Using tick in this instance. Won't destroy the frame rate in the slightest. Here's the player cast, and here's the ball cast. Checking to see if the ball has overlapped with the blocker, checking to see if the player's power-up has been collected and is equal to true, or this boolean is equal to true, checking to see if the ball has collided with the blocker, and checking to see if this boolean is equal to 1 inside of the ball itself. And if so, destroy the blocker, calling destroy. Else if the ball has overlapped, the power-up is false. That's what this operator is for. This exclamation mark basically declares that this variable, if it is false, and if it is false, and if the ball or if the ball's sphere has collided with the overlap the overlap of the blocker, and if ball has overlapped character is equal to 0, which if it hasn't overlapped, if the ball has not overlapped with the character at all, even if the power up is active, then it will then this will be destroyed. Then the ball will be destroyed. That's what the cast is for. That's what this operator, this variable is for, to check to see if if the character is actually overlapped with the ball itself, or the ball has overlapped with the character. Checking to see if ball has overlapped character is equal to null, that the variable, it doesn't exist. If it's not even valid at all whatsoever, then destroy the ball. Else, nothing. Destroy the ball. And I'm only using one overlap for this blocker. I'm using all these checks, casting to each check. The blocker's main idea is to cast to the player and the ball, and grab both variables and check both at the same time to see if the ball can be destroyed or not. The power basically calls the timer inside the character himself. I'm reiterating on this again, checking to see if the power-up timer is equal to false. Checking to see if the power-up is collected is equal to false, and if it is, set equal to true. Then grabbing this timer, setting this timer. And once this timer has deactivated or has deactivated itself, then you set the boolean back to false. Very, very simple. And so far that is the blocker and the ball, and reiterating on how to control the power-up boolean. I'll run through the code again. Here are the includes. Here's delay for the timer. If you noticed in the last video, also as another closing note, if you noticed in the last video that the blockers had way less of a distance at which they were traveling on the y-axis, it's to kind of prove it to prove it to you that I am controlling the distance using this if and else if statement. I'm going to set it back to 1300. I'm going to close the editor and build. As you see now, the blockers are now within that distance, within the distance back and forth. There looks more slick and more, and gives less room for the balls themselves to pass through needlessly, unless I pick up a power-up. See, and as you can see, also the ball, if I do not overlap with it, it won't do it. It will not affect the ball at all. The power-up will not affect at all the ball itself. And, and as you can see, as the G engine debug log also detects to see if I have overlapped with one of the balls itself. And it constantly loops because a timer is playing in the background, constantly checking to see if the ball has overlapped. And now if I try pushing it again, saying after the G engine has been called, the last G engine log, and it's also spawning. I'll go over the spawners in the last video on the final part. Here we go. Let's demonstrate. And to also reiterate, to create a blueprint class, go here, create blueprint class based on blocker. Go over here, select which folder you want to put it in. Blocker underscore BP. Then press create blueprint class. Then you set what the static mesh is going to be, what the static mesh component is going to be here. It could be you know, circle, triangle, whatever. You set this you set the material for it. You set the collision presets. I set the block all dynamic. And I set the trigger volume to overlap all dynamic. In this instance, always where it says here generate overlap events, always tick that to true if you're going to use an overlap. Here overlap all dynamics, same thing. And I'll go over the spawners and the goals in the next video. See you later. Stay safe out there, and stay safe, and have a great and wonderful day or night.